of justice requires of us to speak truth to power. And therefore, may the words of our mouths not only be acceptable in your eyes, O Lord, but may it speak truth to power and encourage justice, so that we can reflect who we are in your eyes. Amen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is what we should put down. No, okay, let's speak back. Good afternoon to everyone. All right. Good afternoon. I am wonderful. I am a poet, a writer, and storyteller, and I'll be sharing some poems with you today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm always excited to be in spaces where but I was just saying that it's always good to be in places where structures of faith and people of faith are interested in things that are not necessarily about faith or about God. So I was excited to get the call. I just want to say shout out to Natasha, who I've been in correspondence with. But yeah, I'll just jump into it. There is always an older woman somewhere trying to teach herself silence, because she was told that no one would believe her. So she's not sure anymore. Not sure if it actually happened. Wonders if she made it up in her mind somehow. Doesn't know how to tell away her bruises or the trauma of her memory. There is a younger one, someone, planning to inherit that silence, because she has seen how abused women are treated. She knows she will be interrogated more than her perpetrator, will be made to feel like she was the accomplice, that she asked for it somehow, that her body is a bait, that her body is a stripping, that her body is a sin, that her body caused a sin. There is always an attempt to explain away a man's deeds, to suggest he was possessed, to suggest it was a demon's doing, to suggest he's a decent man at heart. Forget about a man's apology or his remorse unless it is advised by his lawyer. And even then, notice how much of him it takes to spit it out of his mouth. You'd swear he's been separated from something dear to him, something he cannot do without. Notice how often women are told to learn how to dress better, but never anything to the man, how to behave better.
Good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Convilian Lobu, and I'm from the Lutheran World Federation. But I'm standing here today on behalf of a number of organizations that have come together to initiate this dialogue, and also on behalf of some of our colleagues who've been with us since the beginning of the week. We have shared a lot, and we have come to a time where we thought it would be good to bring in a few colleagues that can help us to reflect further and possibly get to action points. On this, the eve of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, which marks the start of the 16-day campaign against gender-based violence, I welcome you to this very, very important discussion which seeks to harness diaconal access and networks to end violence against women. The theme for this year's campaign is Unite Action to End Violence Against Women. And please note that this is an instructive theme that calls us to come together and to unite, but not just to unite, but to come up with concrete action around ending this scourge. As we gather today as ecumenical actors, most of us are concerned about escalating violence, the impunity of perpetrators, as well as the backlash against women and girls' universal human rights. The UN notes that violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating human rights violations of our time, and that it remains largely unreported due to the impunity, the silence, and the stigma and shame surrounding it. Globally, an estimated 736 million women, almost 1 in 3, have been subjected to physical and or sexual violence. Less than 40% of these women who experience violence seek help of any sort. Equally concerning is the rise in religious fundamentalism, oppressive theologies, as well as negative masculinity. Therefore, we have a critical role to play in faith-based organizations, religious institutions, and civil society in shaping attitudes towards women and girls' rights. It is imperative that we deconstruct all harmful religious, social, and cultural norms that perpetuate violence against women and girls. And with those words, I hand over to our moderator, Nikki. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, school. Siblings in the faith, we are not here only to look beautiful, handsome in our black. We are not here to be what we would say in Jamaica, our wagonists. We are not here just for the sake of being caught in one space at one time. We are here as members of the religious community to say yet again, no to rape and violence. One of the initiatives that is worldwide at this time is the Thursdays in Black campaign. But there are other campaigns. And in recent years after the Me Too movement, there has been a call for church too. We gather online, welcome, and in person here in Johannesburg, South Africa, to discuss issues related to the end of this scourge, of this deadly pandemic that affects women, men, boys, girls, and members of the LGBTQI+ communities, as well as the vulnerable. Over this past week, as so mentioned, we heard painful stories of old women and 8-month-old children being victims of violence. So we will hear from panelists. We have heard from Solid Hope. We will hear from members of the ecumenical community, and there will be space for you to respond. We invite you to listen, to take notes, to pause, to ponder, but most of all, to carry this message of transformation wherever you go. On behalf of the World Council of Churches, Council for World Mission, Lutheran World Federation, I bid you welcome. At this time, I invite Anne Kioi to bring us words from the All Africa Conference of Churches, in whose continent we are having this meeting.
Afternoon, everybody. All protocols observed. I feel honored to stand here in front of you this afternoon as we launch the 16 days of activism. All Africa Conference of Churches is a continental ecumenical body And 16 days of activism is one of the action plan. It's one of the activities in our action plan every year in our agenda department. We recognize that this is an important event, and that's why we feel honored having been invited. And on behalf of my boss, with Reverend Dr. Fidel Mombeki, and our Director for Gender and Women, Reverend Dr. Lydia Moneki, with whose blessing I stand here in front of you, I want to bring you greetings from the All African Conference of Churches. I want also to assure you that at the ACC, we are committed to fight and to call for action against all forms of SGBP. We recognize that this is an injustice that has been committed against women, and we join you today as you launch this important event. As the theme for this year has been mentioned, that let us unite. So my call this afternoon is, as we launch this day, as we launch this activity, let us all unite, take action to create awareness, and as our prayer that has just been read, to speak truth to power. So I say that as I want to assure you of our commitment and that we're going to unite together with all the organizations that are here to call for an end to STBP. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Anne. We would not have been gathered here at this time had it not been for the initiative of the Council for World Mission. And here in the Africa region, leading us in our deliberation is Reverend Dr. Sindiso Jene. Sindiso, would you be kind enough to bring us words of greeting and encouragement?
Thank you so much. And on behalf of the board we say they are the owners of the organization and the resources and the custodians of the organization. I bring greetings. I bring greetings again from the General Secretary, Joseph, who actually, under his blessings, were able to invite others not to come and have us as the host, but to share the thinking. In those greetings, I want to spell out one thing that has always killed the ecumenical organization or the ecumenical movement: the belief that we are better than the other. And I always not believe of any organization that thinks that is better than the other. Coming in here, we are all having something to share as a blessing from God. As you share, I believe and ask that allow the Spirit of God to speak with you first, through you, and through you to us. Those words, let us stand at the margin and speak from the margin, knowing very well that the center is protected. Pray to God that you are not the one who is protecting the center. May the Lord bless you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Sindiso Jene of the Council for World Mission. We do have other ecumenical organizations gathered here with us, representations from different church bodies. And at this time, I would wish to just acknowledge you and apologize that you won't be able to speak at this time, but Solid Hope has another engagement, and we also want to ensure that we give space for our presenters this afternoon. For our conversation today of this 16 days pre-launch activities, we have with us Professor Dr. Ezra Chitando. He serves as the World Council of Churches Ecumenical HIV and AIDS Initiatives and Advocacy Regional Coordinator for Southern Africa. He has a keen and abiding interest in the role and contribution of men to gender justice in Africa and the world. Ezra has contributed to the development of resource materials on transformative masculinities within faith communities. Ms. Kadlego Mahuba is an emerging development finance scholar and practitioner who is passionate about the intersectionality across food, climate, finance crises, especially as they relate to women and smallholder farmers. Lego is a young South African, and we hope to be hearing more from her as she emerges in the future. She is the co-animator for the Youth for Life Giving Food, Agriculture, and Fisheries Program, guided by the Food for Life WCC campaign. She's an advocate for sustainable food systems and economic justice. Reverend Bafana Kumalo, present with us here in Johannesburg, is a member of the senior management team at Sonke Gender Justice, serving as co-executive director and as one of the organization's co-founders. Bafana has had a long and accomplished track record in the NGO sector. He was Senior Gender Technical Advisor for Engender Health South Africa between 2012 and 2013. From 2001 to 2008, Bafana served as a commissioner at the National Commission for Gender Equality from 2001 to 2006, 2007 to 2008. At the CGE, he was instrumental in assisting national and provincial departments of government to plan and coordinate many activities related to men, gender, and HIV/AIDS. He serves as an associate pastor at the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Tembisa. He holds a Bachelor of Theology honors and a Master's in Theology from the University of Natal, Pietermaritzburg. Daniela Greenwich is the coordinator of We Will Speak Out South Africa Coalition and is a lay canon in the Anglican Diocese of Natal and responsible for gender ministries. She has been a feminist gender activist in the faith sector for more than 35 years, with a focus on transforming the patriarchal norms and practices that create an enabling environment for gender-based violence. Daniela is involved in various global, national, provincial, ecumenical, and interfaith collective initiatives to equip the faith sector to address gender-based violence and its underlying faith drivers. We Will Speak Out SA Coalition, National South African Collective Faith Action to NGBV, Side by Side Global Network, the Anglican Safe Church Commission, and the Anglican Diocese of Natal's Gender Ministry. As a consultant, Daniela has been contracted by several local and African faith-based and other organizations to undertake and support qualitative evaluations, gender audits, strategic planning, and gender policy and gender action plan development processes. She is a member of the Circle of the Concerned African Women Theologians and has been happily married for 39 years, has 3 adult children and 2 grandsons. Dr. Lee Dunn is a Jamaican sociologist and gender analyst. She's currently an honorary senior research fellow and former head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, IGDS, at the Mona Unit at the University of the West Indies. She currently lives in Botswana and is a research affiliate with the Sociology Department in the University of Botswana. Lee previously worked with the Caribbean Conference of Churches, Christian Aid, British Council of Churches. Her network includes the Caribbean Women Theologians for Transformation, CWTT. Her 25 years of experience includes teaching, research, publications, and training, which have promoted gender mainstreaming, gender equality, and the elimination of all forms of gender-based violence in various sectors, in particular within ecumenical circles in the Caribbean region. Ladies, gentlemen, siblings all, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel who will be joining us here in person and online. Give me just a minute, I think I lost my other hero. Friends, you are here and we invite you to speak from your spaces of influence and work. We invite you even now to consider what is it that would be your very key message to the rest of the community. Before our panelists begin, I'm respecting and recognizing Solid Hope's need to depart. So let us hear again from Solid Hope, and then we go to our panel.
I watched my motherland and new language in her old age. Her tongue did not stutter in her mouth. I didn't know you could teach someone a language you were not fluent in. It was my father who taught my mother. He taught her syllables with his hands, taught her metaphors with his accents. He embedded jargons on her wrists, put an accent on her throat, loved it when she spoke, couldn't understand when she spoke, loved the sound of it anyway. My mother sounds like whipping when she speaks. The air vibrates when tears fall from her face. Anger erupts in me when she's sad. I want to become lightning when she mourns. I want to strike my father on his chest, forbid him not to speak, although I have many questions. His tongue cannot move when there is blood on the door handle, so he counts on his feet to walk away. My father is leaving, but he never takes his suitcase. Doesn't know how to be completely gone. Doesn't know how to stay. He hates the sight of blood. Our faces tall from all his walking away, so he cannot stand looking at us. I don't know what language or languages he was taught in growing up, but I think he must have been all.
We thank Solid Hope for these very challenging words and an invitation for us to revisit our understanding of masculinities. Those who have ears to hear, may we hear. Our first panelist is Daniela. Daniela, welcome. From your space, what are some of the challenges that faith-based actors face in addressing violence against women and girls?
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me or you can see me.
Clear and seeing you also.
Okay, thank you. I haven't had a chance to see. I'm sitting in the car outside. We've just had a report back conference that we've co-hosted for the KwaZulu-Natal province, all the different organizations working on gender-based violence. We've reported back on the national conference. So I'm afraid that I'm sitting in the car. So please let me know if there are issues. I might have to switch off my camera because I'm not sure about the signal. But I would like to just thank you so much for this opportunity to share in this space with some wonderful people that I've known for a long time and other people that I'm hearing. I will have so much to learn from. And this is such a fitting way to begin the 16 days. And I just really want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I've been asked to speak about challenges faith actors face when addressing violence against women and girls. And I've thought about it. It's a little bit ambiguous. Is it for those of us who are working as activists in the sector? Or is it those of us who are also faith leaders? And I've tried to bring in a little bit of both. And I also would like to suggest that I would like to bring in a little bit of a slight switch around in this conversation as well, to ask also what has it felt like for survivors that I've worked with, and myself as a survivor as well. Because we're not a uniform group. So forgive me if I might go off the topic for some. But when I was thinking about this topic and about the church itself, I was reminded of the children's movie called Nemo, Finding Nemo, about a fish. I don't know how many of you remember that. A few years ago when my kids were small, they loved it. And there was a time in the movie where the fish somehow get flushed down the toilet, and they end up first their tank breaks and they are not able to breathe in the air, and then they are flushed down the toilet, and they happily find themselves back in the ocean. And Nemo finds an old friend of his, and he rushes up to her and he says, "Yay, yay, I'm in water again." And his friend says, "Water? What's water?" And it's always stuck with me, because in a way, particularly in the churches, but also in our different communities, it's like patriarchy is the air that we breathe, or the water that is all around us if we're fish. But we often, as what I found in the church environments, is that because it feels so normal, we don't understand sometimes when people are not able to breathe in that space because they don't have gills in the water that we are swimming in. And so one of the challenges, I think, is to be able to step back and take a look at the environment that we are swimming in with new eyes and consider what that means. And at the same time, to also look at others in our community, and particularly women and girls, and consider, are they breathing, or are they just quietly dying, breathless? So I just thought to just quote from work that we did a few years ago. We had a meeting with about 100 survivors and about 100 faith leaders, mostly from the Christian faith. And the only speakers there were actually survivors. And the faith leaders were, for a change, not preaching, but responding from the floor. And there was just a few people that I would like to quote from, that just to help us to think again in terms of that perspective that is not necessarily what we've normalized. Lihle Twinya, a survivor, has said, we need faith leaders' support. We really need it. They are our point of reference, because church is where we can be authentic, cry and weep without anyone judging us. Yes, we tithe, we pray and we sing, but we also need someone who will stand with us and walk with us. That way we will know that God is alive. For me, that's so sobering. And as an activist in the church sector, the responsibility on us is huge. And so the work with respect to gender-based violence is not an optional add-on for any of us in ministry, but is actually an integral part of who we are and how we minister. And it made me think of this constant tension also as an activist in the church sector between those who see their role as maintaining institutional stability and order and doctrinal purity, and those who, like me, who are really seeking deeper answers, and how that is often so very challenging in a context where that kind of seeking is not encouraged, and we find ourselves sometimes smothered with selective uses of scripture that I think we all know. I'm not going to go into examples, but also the sense in our churches that it's, that many people, including our senior leaders, are happy to go and march against gender-based violence and speak against gender-based violence, seeing it as an aberration in terms of rape and murder and serious beatings and so on, and forget that gender-based violence actually is an integral part of, may I say most, but many women and girls' everyday experience. It's not something unusual. And so if it is an everyday matter, we also need to look at our everyday ministry and the way we are working. And people have so often spoken about the challenge of creating safe and inclusive spaces. And as you heard, I'm quite involved in the Anglican Church in a commission that is trying to explore what that really means and put some things in practice. But I remember a priest once saying to me, we keep talking about creating safe spaces, but until I personally am a safe space, I cannot talk about creating safe spaces around me. So there's also that challenge of being self-aware of how do I relate? What is the language that I use? How do I acknowledge and include those around me and exemplify what it means to be a safe space? So the church needs to be a safe space long before something happens to somebody and they want to come and seek the help that they need. And I've learned in my years of also working very closely in partnership and learning so much from survivors in local communities that many survivors don't report. They don't report to their faith leaders, they don't report to the police, they don't report to the courts, they don't report to their clinics or even their families. And part of that is this fear of judgment. And so the challenge for us also is to think about what are the dominant sort of ideological, theological frameworks that are out there that we are not deliberately disrupting. And so the importance of contextual frameworks and speaking truth to power from not necessarily from just a human rights perspective, because that's so often shut down, but from the perspective of our sacred texts speaking to one another and us discerning what the Spirit is saying in terms of the need to do things differently, to do church differently, as Bishop Purity Malinga has often said of the Methodist Church in Southern Africa.
So
I'm almost done. Yes.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
I beg your pardon?
I'm going to ask you to make your last half a minute.
Yes, I've got one last point to make, and that is that many of faith leaders themselves and us as activists are themselves survivors. And so that is another consideration, to become very aware of our own triggers and when we are working in this environment, what that means. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I went on too long. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Daniela. Lee, Professor Lee Dunn, you have worked across the Caribbean region and now you're here working in Botswana. You have worked with Christian Aid, you have worked with the British Council, but you have heard Daniela's comments about the work of the church. And I happen to know that you have echoed some of these sentiments in some spaces. But tell me, Lee, what has the church done right? And how might we understand the ways in which the churches have collaborated ecumenically to combat drug in your context?
Thank you very much, Nicole, and thank you all for inviting me. Are you hearing me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Right. So I'm honored to be asked to be part of this important discussion because it is something I feel very passionate about. And I just want to draw on some of the practices from the organizations, ecumenical organizations, and other spaces. So, for example, the Caribbean Conference of Churches, which is has 33 members, churches, 34 territories in the English, Spanish, and Dutch-speaking Caribbean. That work has also included work on HIV and AIDS, and gender-based violence increases our risk of that. Working also with people living with HIV and AIDS. At Christian Aid, which is the development arm of the British Council of Churches, working with local partners in different parts of the world to fight injustice, including gender-based violence, and responding to humanitarian emergencies. And I'm glad that one of our panelists is in fact looking at issues around disasters and climate change, because those increase our risks. But also prayer libraries, Christian Aid having prayer libraries. So there are issues happening around the world, and the pandemic, the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence is one of those. So having prayer libraries and also looking at socioeconomic programs, which in fact can help to reduce the risk of gender-based violence against women and girls. The Theological College, United Theological College of the West Indies, is another interesting ecumenical space. It has an HIV prevention program, so all graduates are actually trained in HIV and AIDS. It's in the curriculum. There's gender mainstreaming manual, which has been done. There are awareness building programs in congregations and partnerships, of course, with the Ministry of Health. They also have done this Out of the Shadows Child Abuse Prevention Program in 2021. Then there's work in denominations, and having worked with the Caribbean Conference of Churches and Christian Aid makes me feel very comfortable working with different churches. So the Anglican Church actually had a program on building awareness and prevention of human trafficking. So all the bishops of the Caribbean came together to look at this issue, and that meant that they had to introduce programs. The United Church of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, that I'm a member of, and the Council for World Mission has also done conferences on human trafficking. And I just pause to acknowledge and thank the late Reverend Dr. Margaret Fowler, a minister of the United Church from Scotland originally, who did a tremendous job building awareness, working in partnership in the Grill to not just raise awareness, but also interventions to rescue women who have been victims of trafficking. And when she died, she asked us to donate some of her books on human trafficking to the University of the West Indies library, which is now there. The United Churches and Council for World Mission has also done conferences on human trafficking. In my own congregation, Webster, we have had discussions on human trafficking, abortion, and we have ministers like Nana Moses, Reverend Nana Moses, who has done a play, Where is Melissa, to raise awareness. So you see the creativity that has been used. Here in Botswana, we have been associated with the Open Baptist Church, different from our traditions, but I have a friend, Mrs. Michelle Brown, who leads the Women's Fellowship, and with who I've partnered to do awareness on gender-based violence. So she invited me to do a presentation in one of the other areas on gender-based violence with her friend, Gomolemo. And it's a healing circle for women to talk about their experiences and what can be done. The Caribbean Women Theologians for Transformation, another important ecumenical space, looking at issues around inequalities, gender inequalities, promoting social justice, and information sharing for collective action. And then I'm thankful for friendships of persons who do research and publications around these issues. So there are several ecumenical spaces that I'm honored to have been a part of or have learned from that we can share across the globe thanks to technology. So I just want to say thanks for inviting me. Have I used my time carefully, ma'am?
We didn't hear that last bit you said, Lee.
No, I just want to know if I've used my time carefully. the time, can you, I'm finished. You can go on now.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Lee. So we've been hearing about the challenges and the need to breathe. We've been hearing about the need for new eyes and to address the issue of patriarchy, which is perhaps just as debilitating as sexual and gender-based violence itself. But we've also heard encouraging stories of how the church has been working ecumenically unite to address issues in this field. Before we invite our youth voice, Ezra, you have been working primarily with the World Council of Churches, but with other ecumenical partners as it relates to issues of HIV and AIDS. What are some of the low-hanging fruits that persons online and even those of us gathered here at the Virtual Conference Center could consider taking hold of if we wanted to be the difference that the world experiences? Ezra.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Good afternoon, friends. And I say good afternoon to many usual suspects that I see in the house, with whom I've been in the trenches. Greetings. So not being a native English speaker, I had to look up the words low-hanging fruits. It says in the dictionary that low-hanging fruit refers to the most easily achieved of a set of tasks. It also says low-hanging fruit refers to something that is easy to obtain or achieve. Low-hanging fruits refers to the fruit that grows low on a tree and is therefore easy to reach. And so from how I'm understanding it, what we need to do as faith communities is to identify those more readily achievable goals to end violence against women and girls. And I'm deeply motivated this afternoon by an African proverb which says, and I quote, "Do not sleep where you fell." Do not sleep where you fell. So sisters and brothers, we're allowed to fall. We can fall, but we dare not go to sleep where we fell because we have a task ahead of us. So what must we do? I'm going to highlight 5 quick points and then I go silent. Number 1, we have the capacity to freely utilize the current multiple ministries within our churches to spread awareness and respond to violence against women and girls. These ministries already include the women's ministry fellowships, men's fellowships, children's ministries, which we already have. So the platform is already there for us to spread the word on violence against women and girls and effective responses to HIV and AIDS. We can do this also, the co-panelists who have already spoken, in our theological institutions, in our schools and other spaces that we have. But more concretely, I see ministers of the gospel in the house. We have a mandate, task, and ministry to transform the pulpit into prophetic space where we begin to challenge ourselves, particularly as men and boys, to adopt more responsible and transformative masculinities. I know Mafana is in the house and he will do justice to this. Secondly, colleagues have already spoken about this. We must invest in life-giving biblical interpretations that expose violence against women and girls as a sin. Violence against women and girls and men and LGBTIQ individuals is a sin. And our pulpits need to echo this message very clearly and unambiguously. Third, we must utilize the many activists and specialists and survivors who are already within our churches. And so our task must be one of granting space to individuals who can speak authoritatively on these issues. Fourth, and I'm about to finish, we must increase awareness of continental, regional, and national pieces of legislation that promote women's rights and dignity. So it's not as if we are starting from nowhere. We already have very progressive within SADC, within Africa, pieces of legislation that our governments have signed up to, that our regions have signed up to, that the AU has signed up to, that we need to multiply awareness of. Sisters and brothers, let us not sleep where we fell. Let us collectively and to the best of our abilities work towards a world without rape and violence. Nikki, if you allow me, I have a short poem here. I've been inspired by my sister, a poem dedicated to the daughters of Africa. Daughters of Africa, bearers of rights. See her, daughter of Africa, child of God, sanctified, delivered, dignified, full bearer of rights. Touch her not, anointed she is. Doubt her not, capable she is. Celebrate her, a rock she is. The backbone of families, communities, nations, and the continent. Distinguished leader, gallant heroine, I salute you, daughter of the soil, beloved child of God. I thank you. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you so very much, Ezra. You have challenged us because though we have been naming much of this in our meeting this past week, we know that far often we neglect these low-hanging fruits, or as you say, readily achievable goals and spaces that we can reach out to make the difference we want to see. Katlego, as a young person working in spaces of food security, as a young woman here in South Africa, how would you say that the church has failed and or supported our youth and caused you to feel safer or not?
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, everybody. I appreciate this opportunity to share with all of you. I've been asked to reflect and share on, whether the church has failed women and youth. And as a young Black woman living in South Africa and alive to the abuse and concerned about my safety and worried that I'm not seen and my intrinsic value and dignity is of no importance to men and those who should care for me, I wish to highlight in our conversation today that there is much more that the church can do. We have heard that there have been efforts. There are efforts, there are programs that do exist to combat the violence against women and children. But I do believe that the church could be more proactive in harnessing and utilizing its assets and network, as well as its position and nature as an institution to combat and end violence against women and children and support victims of such abuse. The church can do better to equip and empower women and youth in its communities with tools and knowledge and access to aid to be able to escape the abusive realities, whether it's at home or in the larger society. The church can also do better to restore the discipline and the morals in society by first being sensitive to the realities and the experiences of women and children and abused men and boys, and exercising its agency and power as an institution to not only speak out against these or preach about these various forms of abuse, but also actively invest time and resources in structures and programs that teach men and women about the intrinsic value of the woman, that the woman has value in and of herself, and not only as she relates to a man. And also, equally important, to hold perpetrators accountable and work together with the police force or law enforcement, social workers, and community members, and be ambiguous about the fact that sin is a criminal offense. Sorry, abuse is sin and a criminal offense and is punishable. It is also important that these programs and structures provide the tools and knowledge to support the victims when they do choose to escape, and when they do choose to report, and when they do choose to seek justice. I know that in my own community, domestic violence, for example, is still largely treated as a problem that the family can address or solve on their own. If you run to a police station, for example, you're told that maybe the long-term solution could be that you build a back room for this perpetrator so that you don't have to interact with them in the same household. Or that, no, just lock the gates, and if they jump, then you call us, because then we would be able to attend to a crime that they would have done in that moment. Right now, where are we going to find him? And anyway, there are other dynamics that we don't know of. So rather, if it's really, really urgent, find a day to go to court. So it is not always, it's very often not addressed as urgent and as something that the police can immediately resolve or attend to. And so if people do choose to report, it is a long process in which they are unsupported. And it, in my country and in my community, it goes like this. So you would report the incident at court and a domestic violence section of it, and then you would be given an issued a restraining order against the person who is the perpetrator. So, or the perpetrator would be issued a restraining order to not repeat the same act. And so it is your responsibility as the victim to make sure that that restraining order lands in the hands of the perpetrator. And so they give you their copy, they give you your copy, and they give you a date to return to court. And in all of that, there's not really a way to support the victim except to accompany them to court in most times. And so I do know that the church sometimes, has a program or has people, individuals who volunteer to be this kind of support system to victims, but it is not prevalent and it doesn't always happen. And then the next point would be, if the person comes to the home or wherever you are abused and you meet them and they repeat the act of abuse, then you call the police, and you must have with you also the warrant of arrest. That is also your responsibility to keep and give to the police when that abuse happens again. And again, church has, I think, a very limited way in which they can support, or right now they haven't been able to support in that instance as well, because, we don't know when it will happen and where it will happen. And so the home and the victims are left to be on their own throughout this process. And going to court again would be a lonesome activity in seeking justice. So many times these women, these children, if they do not have an alternative space to go to, they end up being susceptible to the repetition of the abuse and with no support in terms of a safe home or in terms of just being protected from the abuser coming back. And so in all of this, it really feels that the church is silent because even if it is reported, there is no way that the victim is able to receive direct, immediate response or assistance or support from the church. And we can talk about why that is. As it resources, are there not enough people available? Are priests not equipped, or our churches and our structures and our programs not designed in a way that we can respond to these immediately? And if you do receive counsel from church, be it your priest or pastor, many women have said that as victims or survivors, they've often been told to forgive and reconcile and hope and pray that they are able to live in harmony, because then, they might have made a mistake, or please do forgive them and reconcile because they're the father of your children. And it is important that you preserve your home, your marriage, for whatever reason. And this is generally what women are asked to do. And these kinds of responses, I believe, are founded by the ideas that are preached and reinforced every Sunday or every gathering in our churches, that the status of the woman is exclusively dependent on her relationship with the man. Because if you're not married, if you're not a mother, if you're not making sure that your son has a home even though he abuses you, or the husband has a home even though he abuses you, then you are of no value to your family, but also in society. And so what a lot of women then do is stay in these marriages, in these family dynamics that are abusive to them, to preserve the home and to preserve the image of marriage and a functional family. And as such, because she's a woman, is only viewed as useful and of value to a man and the home and the family and the people that she's supposed to care for, her value is limited to her hands in terms of providing food, and her body that can be used to reproduce or for the pleasure of a man. And so if she cannot do those two things within the perceived security and perceived safety of marriage, then she's left to do that for survival out of marriage, because that is her value in society, her body and her hands. And therefore, whether she's in marriage or out of marriage, a woman is generally exposed and susceptible to abuse anyway. And we find a lot of women engaging in survival sex, of course, to survive within marriages and out of marriages. And we have normalized it, and particularly in many poor communities and societies, the church continues to be silent and passive in their response against these violences that cause women to stay in these abusive environments and resort to measures such as survival sex. In the instance of children and youth, the church could do more in terms of supporting them to escape safely again homes that are abusive, and also the abuse that their peers could be subjecting them to in the street, without the children feeling like they also need to resort to survival sex. And gangsterism for a lot of boys is one avenue that they go to and resort to survive, either because they have to escape an abusive home, or they need to survive in the street where they are being bullied and being abused by their peers or older people. So in conclusion, two of the tools that the church can invest in, that I want to highlight right now, is that the church can teach both men and women, about the intrinsic value and agency of a woman, so that no man and no member of society believes that a woman can be used and her value is only to be used. And if she is of no use, then she is to be abused. The second is that there needs to be a deliberate investment in the economic independence of a woman, because that is also a measure of her agency. And providing opportunities and resources and access to opportunities and education will enable the woman to be able to exercise that agency and have capacity to care for whomever she chooses to care for, without feeling that she is indebted to a man who may abuse her if she's not able to be of use in her hands or in her body. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you, Kandego. You were a little bit over time, but the points you raised, especially toward the end, talking about agency, talking about independence, and the need for youth to understand that they are worthwhile, particularly young girls, was most valuable. Here in the house, as Ezra had mentioned, we have none other than Sonke Gender Justice, Bafana himself. Bafana, we are told that men are allies when they actively seek to end violence against women and girls. Are there practical actions for church men, some of whom are gathered in this space, and we have two bishops in the house, to take as allies? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I don't know if everybody hears me on. Okay, thank you. I hope there's not a conflict. Thank you very much. I do think that before we consider men as allies, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. We often talk about gender-based violence as something that happens out there. Whereas actually, as the church, I want to argue we are complicit in gender-based violence. We are complicit in terms of our theology. We are complicit in terms of our symbols. We are complicit in terms of our practices. Part of the problem we have, as Katlego has outlined, is the whole notion of embedding the understanding of humanity as men as the head. As that theological proposition begins to create the kind of problems that we see. The church, I want to argue, is a patriarchal institution and regurgitates patriarchy in various ways in which we do the work that we do, and creates an environment where actually it's permissible for men to do the things that we do. So when we talk about allyship, I think we need to begin by first debunking those notions, because you cannot be an ally with someone who does not respect you, who does not consider you from a dignity perspective as equal, who does not consider you to be somebody that is created in the image of God, just as all of us are. I'm always fascinated in terms of how we find it very easy to forget Genesis 1:26, which says we are all created in God's image, and that God gives all of us, the right and the latitude to rule over everything except each other. And so allyship can only be proper and appropriate if it is premised on the understanding that we are walking side by side, that we are doing this because all of us understand that we are all equal in front of God. And if we start from that premise, then that allyship, in my view, will enable us to build the kind of world that I think is part of God's dream, a world where everyone is treated with dignity, with love, with justice, and then you do not have the dysfunctions of violence against women or children. And I think we have an example of that in the person of Jesus. If one looks at Jesus in the Gospels, Jesus breaks with tradition. He breaks with culture and stands for the truth that he knows and that he believes in, that everyone must be treated equally. Let me make an example about the adulteration of our theology. I make the example of the story of the woman who was caught in adultery. All of us know that story. You know, she's brought to Jesus, and we are told that the men who brought her, because we all know that people who were getting closer to leadership then were men. They say, we caught her in the act. We caught her in the act. I hope you will allow me, people of God, that we will be honest here. In those days, over 2,000 years ago, I'm sure this was the missionary style of having sex, which means the men was on top. But they pulled the women under the act and brought her to Jesus. I often ask the question, where was the man? Now, this is where patriarchy is embedded. Because in our society, anything that goes wrong, the woman is to blame. So allyship, therefore, I am arguing, must be based on reappropriating our understanding of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And that it must be embedded on dignity, on respect, on acceptance, and unconditional love. Then that allyship is for me honest, because then I can't treat my sister as less than me, because all of us are equal before the eyes of God. To conclude, even in African cosmology, we talk about the concept of Ubuntu. We say Umuntu, Umuntu, Ngabantu. In other words, I cannot be a person just by myself. I am because you are. And the word Ubuntu, which is a Nguni word, is not gendered. It's not talking about a man, it's not talking about a woman. It talks about a human being, which is what the essence of creation is about. And I'm arguing, therefore, that if we talk allyship, it must be premised on the understanding that we all need to treat each other with dignity and respect. Because anything less than that is actually reinforcing patriarchy. So I don't like the language, for instance, of men must protect women. Men must not protect women. Men must behave. Men must behave so that the women don't have to feel they need to be protected.
Amen.
We need a world where women must be free to express themselves, to live life that God wants all of us to live, without being a shadow to somebody else. Now, as a church, we have a problem because we say to women, as Gabriel was saying, when there's a problem, no, it's a demon, forgive him. You know, it's interesting that this demon only affects men. You know, why is it that women don't do similar things to men? You know, and this is the kind of the paradigm of patriarchy that I think we need to problematize. Because so long as we live with patriarchy in the church and accept it, we will never address the issues that we are seeking to address. So allyship must be premised on those fundamental principles. Thank you.
But before you return the mic, Bahana, there is this phenomenon that I mentioned at our intro of church tool. And the concept of church tool is that the church has been many times implicated in acts of sexual and gender-based violence. How must the church respond?
Well, at first, as a church, we must confess that we are complicit in violence against women. We are often silent. I deal with many cases where women come and say, this happened, and my pastor said, no, we must pray, this thing will go away. You know, what Katrina was saying, we all say to women, you know, persevere, you know, pray, things will be fine. But we never challenge the men to change. When we do things in church as men which are wrong, there's understanding that, no, he faltered. You know? As Ezra was saying, he fell, he will stand up. But when it is women, we put the whole ton of cannons on how things should not be done. Now, I am suggesting that what we need to do is to first have accountability within the church. If we know somebody who does things that do not conform to our principles, let's hold them accountable. In this country, I am afraid to say, we have many so-called church men of God. I don't like that word because all of us are people of God. Because that already problematizes this notion that I'm talking about. We don't hear of women of God, we hear of men of God. The women are called first ladies. I don't know what that means. But language is also very important because language is about power. Language is about control. I am saying that there needs to be accountability. We need to begin to say as church, violence against women is sin. It's not acceptable. Those who do it must face consequences. Part of those consequences, of course, is that they must be willing to change, confess, and take responsibility for their action. Now, we let men free in church because you commit errors here as a clergy. I was talking to my bishop yesterday about something else. We move you from this parish to another parish where you continue doing the same thing. You know, and these are the things that I think we need as the church to really rise up to the occasion and say, this cannot be accepted in the house of God. Our God did not ordain us to be violent to each other, irrespective of who that is. And when one of us falters, there must be accountability.
Thank you, Bafana. Daniela, if you are still online, I want to put the same question to you based on some of the issues you raised earlier. How can the church be part of the transformation in the light of church too? For who are online and those of us gathered here, I invite you to think of your absolutely burning questions, because after this, we'll be open for questions.
Yes.
Daniela, are you?
Yes, hi,
Just
thank
go-
you.
Just go.
Thank you. Sorry, I've
Just go to the same.
been with signal. Can you hear me? Hello?
You.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry. I'm actually driving now, so I'm a little bit in and out, but I will be stable in the next 3 minutes or so. Are you able to come back to me then?
Yes, we will. So
Thank you.
I invite you to think about that for your 1 minute response, and we will come back to you in about 3 or thereabouts. Leaf and Kat Lager, would either of you wish to answer that question before we go to our audience?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. In fact, I remember years ago, the World Council of Churches was having its meeting in Jamaica, and there was a publication on that was being launched, Pastors Who Pray. And over years, we have seen, we've had several experiences of pastors who have violated the rights of women and girls in their congregation. And the interesting thing is that it shows that we need so much education and healing, because some of the very women in the church would then be castigating the girl and her family. Why did you bring this up? So we'd love to put things under the table, right? And I did some research and found that there is a lot of information available, yes, on helping congregations to cope with this problem. Are you hearing me, Nicole? Right. So I'm just saying that we're thankful for a lot of the online resources that help congregations to deal with this thing. I've had students who are doing research on gender-based violence, and the surveys confirm this thing about the pastors telling them to just pray about it. And then that leads to the other problem we have, which is intentional homicides. And I just encourage us to look at the horrible rates of intentional homicides. So the lack of responsiveness of the church, the police, and also really puts us, particularly those of us in Jamaica, the Caribbean, but also in Southern Africa, really in a situation of crisis around that. So we have a lot of work to do to collect the data and realize, inform, use that data to inform what it is we're doing. And there are other interventions like the Brothers for Change program, where there are interventions for males who will be then trained to take responsibility, understand what gender-based violence is, take responsibility, and they spend something like 40 weeks, and it does in fact make an impact. So there are several models that we can in fact use to help both men and women. And this thing of tolerating gender-based violence for the sake of the family is something that we really have to re-socialize ourselves, or women or men. And just finally, Nicole, the health and family life education. We need to be more realistic about what it is we are talking about within our churches and our schools to really help people to change their behaviors. And I just want to also thank the note about taking action to see who is doing what. A lot of work and resources are available through UN system and other agencies. We tend to want to work in silos. One of the former speakers spoke about those alliances. So I'm saying, let's build those partnerships to make those changes, and we can in fact have a more enabling environment within our churches, within our homes, and that will be reflected in the wider society. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. So I'm going to open the floor to Bishop Swanini from Eswatini, who has a burning question. And then if Daniela is here, we'll invite her to come back on at that point. Bishop.
Thank you. And thank you also to the panelists for the enlightening presentations. I think one of the things that is coming out here is, first of all, that there is still no reporting of abuse, especially in churches, and especially if it is done by a church leader. People will not report. But then the second thing for me is when you look at the reluctance to report. Why are people reluctant to report? And I think it calls for us then to do more than just raising awareness, but preparing ourselves as churches, and also working with other institutions, including government and the legal systems in our countries, to deal with these cases when they come, so that people don't just report for the sake of reporting, but you get then the recourse that you require after reporting. Because if you only report for the sake of reporting, then people will be afraid. So my question, I think, to the panelists is, what can we do, or what should be done to prepare churches to actually be in a position to accompany a person who reports abuse all the way, not just to listen? Because sometimes the pastors or the church leaders will say, let us pray about it, or we should persevere and whatnot. It's just, it shows a limitation of their own capacities as well, that they cannot go beyond that. And you need to build the capacity. But also, if you take a case through the legal system, are we making the point that people can access justice and not leave them along the way? And then they'll go and talk about it. I reported to the police, they did nothing. The person who did this to me is back in the community, live with that person. That discourages the reporting, and it will always lead to the apathy when it comes to reporting cases.
Thank you, Bishop. Ezra, if you are still on the line, I'm going to put that question toward you, because you were part of the WCC Code of Conduct construction in the last assembly, and I know that yourself and people like Bafana and LWF have been instrumental in preparing not just codes of conduct, but gender justice policies for use within churches. Ezra.
Thank you, Nikki. I thought we were friends. You are putting me on the spot. So, can you hear me, friends?
Yes, we can.
Good. Thank you. So, yes, two quick ones. A very important question there. Are we capacitated enough to accomplish the ministry of accompaniment? And accompaniment does not mean taking someone halfway through the journey, but take them through the whole journey, as it were. So two quick ones. Number one, we need to do more in terms of the capacitation of the faith leaders in terms of counseling and ensuring that the whole people of God are supported as they seek healing. Number two, we need a radical appreciation of what it means to be church more broadly defined. So within the body of Christ, there are many competent women and men who are working in service delivery that is very strategic in terms of accompanying survivors. So the task for the religious leader for me is to be able to identify which other professionals they need to partner with, who will, because the priests and reverends, and I know Vavana protested on the men of God, all these other clerics are constantly, so the audience is wide. So they need then to identify other fellow workers in God's vineyard who are able to give or to perfect the ministry of presence, which the distinguished faith leader herself or himself cannot achieve. What we have done as World Council of Churches is also to work on developing resource materials in partnership with the UN family, which we can also make available. Thanks and over.
Thank you, Ezra. Daniela has indicated that she's present. And so we invite Daniela in 1 minute to make a response. I give each panelist half a minute to make their final comments because we have less than 5 minutes for the end of this webinar.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry about moving in and out of signal. I'd rather not switch on my video if that's okay, just to say that the two kind of watchwords for me are safety and sanction. That in a church where everybody knows that if abuses do take place, those perpetrators will be sanctioned. It increases the safety, but also what I said earlier, that the faith leaders, the church leaders, and the pastoral teams need to be safe spaces so that people know that if there is an issue, they can report without judgment. Secondly, we tend to prioritize trying to avoid dividing the church, and and justice is sacrificed in the process. And so I think the balance between safety and sanction is absolutely critical. And as others have said, the aim being to learn to do church differently. And part of that is what others have said, but also that we accompany one another to become change agents in our own contexts, to actually build a movement that begins to shift the narrative and shift the dominant assumptions within our church context, which will then open up those spaces and make it more possible to challenge the dominant patriarchal norms. Thank you.
Thank you. And as we prepare to hear the final word, Kadlega, would you like to answer either of the questions that was directed? How does a church prevent church too? And how might the church have more teeth in what we do? You have less than a minute, and we don't need a South Africa minute.
No, it's okay. I won't be able to answer in half a minute. So we can move on to the closing remarks.
That's okay. If you do have thoughts, we would be welcoming them because we want to ensure that the voice of the youth is included.
Okay. I think what I hope, oh, sorry, let me get my video on. There we go. I hope that we can work together. I like what Ezra has said, that we need to have an understanding of what it means to be a church that has responsibility beyond Mass on Sunday or the worship services, or have a broader understanding of what church is and what its use is. So for me, that is important. And so I hope that we can all work together as people that have different capabilities, talents, expertise, experiences, to create a church that is alive to the signs of times and the experiences of its people, and be able to use our talents, our experiences to be able to enrich and enhance our members' everyday life experience, because that's what it is. Because abuse impedes or takes away from the quality of our lives and our life experiences. And so if we can work together to do that, I think we would be a great church.
Thank you so very much, Katlego. As we prepare to hear the final words in less than a minute from each of our panelists, I invite those of you who are in the audience to type in the chat your ideas of what the church needs to do as we work ecumenically for transformation. Let us begin with Bafana, who is right here in the host, in less than one word, one sentence, 1 minute, whichever of the choices you take. What is the next step for the church?
Well, I think we need to reflect quite seriously as the church about our role in society around these issues we have identified. That requires ensuring that we become a transformational entity in ensuring that we bring life, and life in its fullness. And that we can only do if we ourselves do self-critique on the things that Bishop Zwanini has raised. How do we ensure that we strengthen our structures for accountability? How do we relook at the whole patriarchal notion of who we are as the church? How does that actually push us to rethink our theological propositions so that it becomes a space that is welcoming to everyone and affirming to all?
Thank you, Bafana. Lee.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm greedy, so I want policy research, the establishment of gender policies for churches, and action plans, sexual harassment policies, and mechanisms for monitoring and evaluation. There are several stories in the Bible on gender-based violence that would make a very good education and training program. We can do research also partnering with universities. So I have a good partnership with the University of the Botswana, University of the West Indies, and we can partner with churches to actually do that. But I also ask us to look at our curriculum for theological training and in-service training of our pastors, right? Use our human rights milestones that can help to focus our awareness building programs. But also, Nikki, to use technology. You know, we are dealing with young people, technology. One of the things I saw is persons using computer technology to tell stories to change behavior. And just finally, disability inclusion. Persons with disabilities are also being violated. We need to integrate gender with disability with things like climate change, which increases our risks. So of course, being greedy, these are some of the things I think church can do more and better. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I want to note, as you mentioned, disability inclusion in the conversation, that in the 2021 Women's Human Rights Advocacy Training, hosted by the Lutheran World Federation, World Council of Churches, and Ecumenical Partners, we actually were told that persons with disabilities have a greater risk of being violated because it is perceived that they will not be believed or they will not be able to provide evidence. How are we, and I know you don't like this term, Bafana, but how are we protecting and providing agency for persons with disabilities? Ezra, Katlego, and Daniela, you have the floor and the final words.
Thank you very much, Nikki. So I say that as church, we must refuse to sleep where we fail and refuse quite adamantly. And so we must invest in considering working ecumenically and considering sexual and gender-based violence to be central to our ministry. And in so doing, we must prioritize working with adolescents and youth, because as Thomas Sankara reminds us, we must win the future. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Ezra. Katlego.
Oscar.
Okay, it seems we've lost Katlego. Daniela?
Yes, thank you. Just very quickly, I think first is we need to be honest. We need to be accountable. We need to actually be open to seeking our blind spots. We seem to often have split personalities. We're activists in one place, and then we go and we use the same old liturgies and sing the same old hymns, and also consider the different resources that are available in terms of liturgies as a translation of progressive theologies that we can actually in a way infiltrate our church spaces with different language, different narrative and ways of thinking, and never to forget that this is an ongoing journey. Thank you.
Thank you. It seems that Katlego is having connection issues. She just came back and we lost her again. Friends, siblings in Christ, we are all God's children, called to reflect our own identity in the image and likeness of God. We have heard much today, and I do believe that what we have heard, whether it was where the church isn't present, where the church has been doing work, where the church has been silent or absent, where the church has been complicit, we have been invited to see where we are in this journey for transformation. Even though this theme, unite to end violence against women and girls, is not one that originated within the ecumenical space, I do believe that it is a call to action for every single one of us. And so there is only one question that is left. What am I doing and not doing to effect the transformation for all of God's creation? Siblings, it has been a very challenging, educational, informative afternoon. We especially want to thank our technical team who have been providing service from Geneva, from South Africa, and toggling between the internet, Zoom space, as well as here in Johannesburg. We want to thank our hosts, the Birchwood Hotel, who have allowed us access to internet in a time when we were kind of worried about whether we would have enough internet and power to make this happen. But most of all, I want to thank every single one of us, panelists and participants, without whom this entire pre-launch of the 16 days of activism and advocacy could not have been possible. One of our colleagues today argued that We are canceling 16 days. We want it to be 365, 66 days of advocacy. Advocacy begins with us, you and me. God bless you and thank you. I'm Reverend Nikki Ashwood. Over and out.